So I think with that, I will hand it over to tonight's presenter, Sean MacMullan from WardWise, who will talk about neighborhood infrastructure spending in Chicago. Take it away, Sean.
Hey everyone. Okay, give me 1 second here. All right, WardWise. We are a breakout group under Chai Hack Night. Before I begin, I just want to thank all the contributors to the project. We've been going for about a year. I'm going to shout out Jake Smith and John Ruff. They supplied a lot of the data we're working with. Claire, Damon, and Jonathan were instrumental in the old site, and Noah and Tex have been instrumental in the new site we're working on and the database with all our data. So what are we talking through tonight? I split this up into a civics section and a tech section. So we're going to talk about some parts of Chicago civics and infrastructure and how that gets funded and what you can do to be part of that process. And then we're going to go into the data that WordWise has been working with around all of that and some tools we've made using that data. So why should you care about neighborhood infrastructure? I'm going to go through a couple reasons. 24% of Chicago's greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. Climate change is a thing. Greenhouse gas contributes to that. Infrastructure is what moves us from cars and other gas emitting vehicles towards things like walking and bike lanes and public transit. Historically, this kind of spending has not been without corruption. This is from John Ruff's research paper, where he was looking at Alder Bernie Stone's spending in his ward. And he found, if you see this graph on the right, all that spending was going towards the precincts that were voting for him. So it's important for the public to be informed so that they stop that stuff from happening. And then the reason that I think is most important, Chicago's put forth a Vision Zero plan. This was published in 2017, and it's their goal to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries by 2026. But if we look at where we're currently at, this year alone, in the first 3 months of the year, we've had 24 traffic fatalities, and that trend is not going down. It's kind of been stable up and down. And the biggest tool we have in our toolbox for stopping traffic fatalities is better infrastructure. So Chicago civics. Chicago as a city is split up into 50 wards. These are legislative districts made up of about 55,000 residents each. Over here on the right are the most recent boundaries. Those were picked in 2023, and they'll get redrawn in 8 years. And each ward elects what's known as an alder. The easiest way to think of this is as a mini mayor. So they handle city services at the ward level, and then they also go to town hall and vote on citywide legislation. So this is the list of current alders across the city, one for each ward. Now, each year, an alder gets $1.5 million to the city's aldermanic menu program. That's commonly referred to as quote unquote menu money. And that goes towards neighborhood infrastructure in the ward. So things like alley resurfacing, bump outs, sidewalk repairs, bike lanes, all that good stuff. So you see it put towards small neighborhood projects. This pedestrian median over here on the left, that's $75,000. That's the estimate they provide. Most of these projects are in that range from a couple of tens of thousands of dollars to a couple $100,000. You're not going to see this money going towards large projects. So like, for example, this here on the right is the Milwaukee Streetscape and Logan Square Circle redesign, and that's millions of dollars. So it goes towards small neighborhood projects, not large projects. It's also typically congregated on residential streets. So if you think of the city of Chicago, it's a grid system. Those bigger streets with high traffic throughput, lots of businesses, those are arterials. They're green and red here on the map. And menu money can go towards certain things on them, but they have their own buckets of cash for things like resurfacing. So most of the menu money is going to those white streets in the middle, residential streets that have homes, businesses, apartments, parks, schools, that kind of stuff. So this is the list of standard menu projects that was sent out to alders in 2023. And this is basically everything they can simply do with their menu money with some prices underneath. So things like alley repairs, resurfacing, street resurfacing, specifically residential street resurfacing, bike lanes, sidewalk repairs, lighting, things that change the design of the streets like traffic circles and pedestrian bump outs. And if you look, the ones that have the little blue banners in the circle, those are Vision Zero projects. So things that the city will think help reduce traffic fatalities. Now, alders can spend money on things that aren't on this list, but it gets more difficult depending what they're trying to do. They have to go back and forth with CDOT. If it's not a capital improvement, so something that's not brick and mortar, that they can't do that. So typically if something's on this list here, it's very easy for them to do with their menu money, but things beyond that, they can't do. So what the overall process looks like, CDOT sends that project menu to alders. That happens at the beginning of the year. Alders select projects from the list, trying to fill up their budget of $1.5 million. They send that to CDOT. CDOT reviews the projects. There's some back and forth. Sometimes projects get turned down and another one suggested. So like if an arterial street's about to get resurfaced, CDOT won't let you do a bike lane on that because it's going to be washed away in a year or two anyways. Bike lanes are also particular about having a cohesive network. So bike lanes to nowhere get shot down, but bike lanes that connect existing bike lanes tend to go through. But there's that back and forth. And then when the construction season starts, which is late spring to early fall, the projects are enacted within the year. Now, the important thing about this, which differs from a lot of infrastructure projects you see in the city, is it's one person and their office, the ward office, making the decision, and they are meant to represent their constituents. So that means ward residents are able to speak to their alder, and if they're familiar and know what they're talking about, they can influence their alder and help have a say in the projects that are happening in their neighborhood. And for anybody on this call that's interested in doing infrastructure stuff, that means you can speak to your alder and have them try to do projects that you're interested in. Some wards, this is a very formalized process known as participatory budgeting. So residents get to vote on how to spend the money. There'll be an idea collection period, followed up with a voting period where everybody in the ward is allowed to participate. And then the alder uses the votes with a little bit on the side for necessary projects to decide how they spend their money. Right now, that is happening. This might not be a comprehensive list. I've done my best to find what's going on in the city, but it's not congregated in any one spot. You've got wards 1, 11, 29, 30, 33, 35, 39, 47, 49, anything on this map in the city that you see. Those wards are the ones that are currently doing participatory budgeting. So if you're in one of those wards, if you'd like to follow along, you can scan this QR code. The process of getting involved is you find your ward and your alder. You go to their website, you sign up for their newsletter. Late summer, there's going to be an idea collection period where you would suggest ideas. And then at the end of the year, there's going to be a voting period where you would vote on ideas. So what that looks like, if I was going through the tool, you find your ward and either look through the website. I don't think all wards have websites on these kinds of tools. This is Chicago Councilmatics. Chicago, the city government also has a tool. If you don't see the website on the tool, you could probably find it with a Google search too. And if it doesn't exist, you can always email. But you go to the website, you'd search through that. Most wards have a newsletter and you sign up for the newsletter. Then come late summer, this is from my ward last year, you get an email. If you're paying attention, it's going to say something about participatory budgeting, and you would go to the form in the email and submit your ideas. Then towards the end of the year, there's going to be another email talking about the voting process. You go and you vote, and then the ward office tallies the votes, goes back and forth with CDOT to determine projects, and the projects start happening the next year. If you are looking at that map I had before and realizing it's very small and there's a lot of wards in the city that don't do participatory budgeting, don't despair, because you can still try to talk to your alder. So it's basically the same process, but instead of filling out a form, you're just going to email the ward office directly, and then email again towards the end of the year, assuming you get a response the first time, just to follow up and ask for your project again, see if they're going to follow through. So an example of what that might look like, this is me here pretending I live in the 19th ward. You want to say that you're a resident, give an approximate area where you live so they know that you're a resident, and you're going to ask for a project. So the things you want to do is be very specific. You want a specific project that you're asking for. So in this example, protected bike lanes, and you want a specific location that you're asking for it on. Even with participatory budgeting, sometimes you get people that want several things across the whole ward, and those ideas unfortunately get tossed out. You need a specific one type of project in one specific location. And you also want to double check that it's probably reasonably priced. You don't want to do like $1 million project because the money has to go across the entire ward. So you would do that, you'd reach out to your alder, maybe make the case of why you think it's important. And also try to get your neighbors and friends that live nearby to do the same thing, because they might listen to one person, but if they start hearing voices all across the community asking for the same thing, they're going to start to pay attention. So to recap, Chicago is split up into wards, and each ward has an alder. Alders get 1.5 million in menu money for neighborhood infrastructure, and you as a resident are able to influence that spending either through participatory budgeting or by talking directly to your alder. Now, getting into Wardwise's work and who we are. Wardwise is a breakout group under Chai Hack Night, whose presentation you're currently at, and that is a civic tech volunteer organization. And we respond from looking at the data produced from this process. So the Office of Budget and Management publishes each year a menu program book, and that shows ward by ward what was spent and where. So this is what the PDF looks like for 2022. But if you'll notice, it's number one, a PDF, which is not a great format for working with data. And it's also very large. This one here is 155 pages. So not easy for a person to come in and do a lot of analysis with, besides looking for like one single specific project. So what Wardwise has been doing with this data, we've been trying to make it accessible. That means putting it in a spreadsheet format for the general public to work with and a database for the more tech savvy to use. We've been doing analysis to add meaning to the data, so you can see trends across a ward and how each ward is prioritizing its spending. And then we're also trying to make it personal. So infrastructure is very important, but it's not the sexiest thing. And one way to make something interesting to a person is to make it about them. So how can we show people the projects that are around them and projects they specifically care about? So the overall process of what we've been doing to achieve those goals, data extraction from the PDFs, then data analysis, which is categorizing and geocoding the data. Geocoding means putting onto a map, and then tools and visualizations to work with our process data. So going back to this PDF, we lucked out that this is a digital PDF. It's not a scan, which means the raw text you're seeing on the screen is in the file. So we had a Python script we were using to extract that data. We did that for years 2018 through 2022. And that's kind of where we stopped, because as you go back through all the years, the format starts changing, and that means you have to change the script and how it's picking up the data. It was at this point we lucked out, and through the civic tech community, we came into contact with Jake Smith, who's a journalist, and John Ruff, who's a researcher, and they both had independently done their own scraping all the way back. Jake had gone to 2012, and John Ruff had done a little bit extra. He'd done a Freedom of Information Act request to the Office of Budget Management, and he got PDFs going back to 2005. So we're working with his data primarily now, but they both did great work. We're very thankful for them. John also did preliminary geocoding work that we are also using. So after we did the extraction ourselves and then started using other people's data to fill it out, this is the kind of format you end up with. Breaking down the columns, you've got the ward that a project is in, you've got the year that it happened, you've got the item, which is the product description, you've got location, which is a text description of where it occurred, and the cost. And looking past over all the data we have, it's 18 years worth, comes out to $1.26 billion in spending across 46,000 projects. So it's a lot of data we're working with. The next thing we did, having extracted all this data, was starting to find meaning with it. So for analysis, we categorized it, and that's very straightforward. We skimmed the data and we looked for things that were coming up, patterns, and decided upon some categories based on that. And then for each item description we have in the data, we look for text that we think describes the category. Here it would be alley. And if that item has that text, we assign it the category alleys. So when you do this across all the projects for a ward for a year, you start to see some trends. This here is the 19th ward in 2022. And you can see now it's not just individual projects. You can see they prioritized alley spending, followed by sidewalk repairs, street resurfacing, and parks. The other step we've done is geocoding. We are primarily working with a format known as GeoJSON. So when you have these infrastructure projects, sometimes they're best described as a point. Like if a single patch of sidewalk was repaired, that would be a GPS point. But sometimes it's an entire street, which that's better represented as a line. You see there in the middle. And alleys are also typically in the data as a bounding box. They give the streets that surround the alley, not the alley coordinates themselves. That's a box. So GeoJSON is a very nice format that lets us represent points, lines, and polygons together in one file. So the process that we followed to geocode, that's again starting to appear on the top with this text description. The text description comes in a couple of different formats, and we break that down. So on West 74th Street from South Princeton Ave to South Harvard Ave, what that really means is there's two intersections we're worried about. It's 74th Street in Princeton, 74th Street in Harvard. So we extract that out. Then we use geocoding tools. We've worked with data from the Chicago Open Data Portal. We've also used some geocoding API services, and you find where those 2 points are. And then coming back to this format we started with, we know that represents a street, a line. So we draw a line between the 2 points. And when you start doing that across a neighborhood, it looks like this. And when you zoom out and you start doing that across the whole city, it looks like this. And this was the 2018 to 2022 data. So it's even more dense than it appears here on the screen. Now, the fight we are currently fighting as our work continues is bad geocoding, which means some items don't make it onto the map. There's no address map. So we have the project description, but no GPS point on the map to match it. The particularly egregious one that you see here is projects that stretch across the city because they pick up a point not where they're supposed to be. You get that sometimes with streets that run parallel and then intersect off in the distance, or sometimes a point just matches a street like off in the suburbs. So that project is hitting 3 points in the city and 1 point off in the suburb, and it stretches across the map. So that is something we are working through, trying to figure out how to automate that and, well, identify and then automatically clean up all these problematic projects. So very quickly, I'm going to skim through this. This is recording. You can go back if you want to see the details. This is the code libraries we used, where our data came from, different API tools we used, and down at the bottom are the GitHub repositories. So that's the WordWise one, and then John Ruff's where he did the PDF extraction. So getting into the tools that we have built on top of this data, here on the left is a very thrown together map. It's Kepler GL, which is a mapping library from Uber. And that is just showing project maps. That's on our WordWise GitHub repo. But really the kind of prime jewel of the work we've been doing is a website. So over here on the right is a website that we built in Flutter that is a Google framework. And it's got everything from this graph that I've shown a few times with individual project breakdowns, a Find My Ward tool that's integrated to help guide you to your alder, automatic menu program that I was talking through before with extra details, and a map that shows where the city prioritized its spending. So I'm going to go very quickly through some of that, but not the whole site because a lot of it's been done in the new site. So I don't need to hit on that twice. That opened up. Okay. So our site currently live at wardwisechicago.org. You would start with Find My Ward, go through here. The one things that I'm going to focus on because it's not in the new site yet is that chloropeth map. So citywide spending per categories, you can see what each ward prioritized for a given year. So street servicing tends to be the most spent money. If you look at something like bicycle infrastructure, there's really only a few wards that put any money towards that. And then also important is our spending menu, which to the best of my knowledge is not publicly available anywhere else because that is a PDF that gets sent to ward offices. So we have shared this knowledge with the world, wardwisechicago.org menu items. Getting back to the presentation. Let's see if I go full screen. Nope. Getting back to the presentation. So we did a soft launch earlier this year. Having done some informal user testing, the site is a lot of raw data, and people that are techie or really like infrastructure, it interests them. But the general public, it tends to go over their head and they lose interest. So we did a soft launch towards people that fit those categories I just described. And that was me spamming a bunch of Reddit communities based on urbanism and tech, and also all the group chats that I'm in about the same things. So that got us about 100 users. I also sent it to Streets Blog Chicago, and they have not published an article yet, but one of the writers, Steve Vance, tweeted about it and linked our site. And so that is what that second spike is there. So equally as good as spamming Reddit and group chats is getting Steve Vance to tweet about your work. But yes, our goal is to get this in front of a larger audience, but we wanted to make a lot of changes to the site before we did that. and we found the Flutter framework was restrictive. It's meant to develop for multiple platforms, iOS, Android, web, computers. And with that comes complications that's not web forward. It's also not well known. So we had a lot of onboarding anytime we got a new volunteer, and it didn't have extensive libraries that we could rely on. So we've since switched to Next.js, which is a JavaScript framework built on top of React. It's awesome. A lot of the stuff just works out of the hood. And it also has other libraries that lets us do cool things like this map here you see, and APIs, so people can query our website and get specific data back. And then behind that, we've also started moving our data into a Postgres database. We had it in static CSVs, which worked, but harder to work with when you want to do interesting queries and cleanup. So I'm going to go and demo the new site and go through the whole kind of walkthrough. You've got this landing page, which still needs a little bit of cleanup, but you would go to find your ward and type in your address. This is not where I live. It's just a random address. You search, you get to find information about the ward you're in, all the contact information for your alder. So his office's phone number, email address.
John, sorry, we're still seeing the Google Slides.
Oh, thank you. Let me stop sharing real quick and try sharing again. Screen. If I do that, does it work?
Yep. New site.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, starting over. Here's the home page. Still needs a little bit of cleanup, but you click here and you go find your ward if you didn't know what it already was. You type in an address and you search, and it tells you the ward you're in and your alder's information. So you've got the phone number, email address, where their office is located, all their social media handles. And then you can go in and look at their spending on a year-by-year basis. So looking at the 35th in 2023, all the different sidewalk repairs, alley repairs, street resurfacing, so on and so forth. You can change the ward you're looking at. You can change the year you're looking at. That all updates in the URL. So if you wanted to share those with somebody, you could. We've got a nice little FAQ page. Pull this out of the way. About page. The spending menu I mentioned, which is the same thing. You can click projects and you get the pictures, description, cost breakdown, and additional information from CDOT. And then two of the things I'm really excited about, we've got this map. So we've got that Postgres database in the background and individual projects that you can click through. And if you were to search for a random address, let's do this. It moves to that address and finds the projects around there. Do it one more time just to show it off because I think it's really cool. Finds all the projects around a given address. So hypothetically, somebody who may be interested in infrastructure comes in here and types in their home address and sees all the projects around their home and thinks it's really cool. And then they keep investigating. We also have an API. So going to the API, spending items, year category, you can search that, comes back with all the data, fits the parameters. You can also go by wards. So if you want to see all the spending, and let's actually keep the parks category, all the Ward 1 spending for parks, you could do that. And it's also mobile friendly. So I'm going to reload this because some things work better. Ooh. Let me change the sizing here because that is not 92%. Go 75%. Nope. 50%. There we go. Okay, a little small, but you can see everything. So mobile friendly, you can click here, pan, zoom. Same thing with the ward spending breakdown. Comes up here on the bottom. You can scroll around. So that is the new site. We are still working on it, but it's some amazing stuff. Getting back into the presentation. That's everything we've worked on. As we're rounding this out, I'm just going to go over some trends and interesting things we found in the data. So from 2005 to 2023, the categories we've come up with and how we've categorized the projects, this is the spending breakdown. So most of the menu money is going towards street resurfacing, and that's followed up by sidewalk repairs, alleys, and lighting. Going into interesting things, I would keep a focus on this 43% you see averaged across the city. We were looking through the website and we noticed that the 19th ward almost every year looks like this, where they spent the entire budget on street resurfacing. And so when you do a breakdown for how long that alder has been in office, 2012 to 2023, Compared to the 43%, he's spending 9.5 or 95.5% on street resurfacing. Don't know much more beyond that. I think South Side wards tend to prioritize street resurfacing because they're a little bit more spread out geographically, but that's a lot of money going towards streets that could be going to other things too. We had a member join in the 42nd ward, and we were curious and we were looking through what his alder spent money on. And we came across last year, Alder Brendan Riley spent $410,000 on police cameras. I don't know if that's an old item that was on previous spending menus or if that's like a secret item that you have to know to ask for, but that is a lot of money towards police cameras that could also go towards other things. And then this is going to be the last one. This was really cool. I was reading an article where Alder Daniel Espada was talking about how his residents had funded bus only lanes on Chicago, and it was through his ward budget. And sure enough, if you look down here on the right, that shows up in the data. It's a pavements marking menu in 2022. I don't think you can just ask your alder to go and do this and put in a bus lane. There's prior work here with CDOT. It was a pop-up bus lane first, and then later with the menu money, it became permanent. But very cool that you can do this to use menu money to also prioritize public transit. So that is our work so far. It's been data scraping analysis and tools for engagement. We still have a lot we want to do. Menu money is a small part of the money that goes towards infrastructure in the city of Chicago. So there's other sources and buckets out there. And at some point, we'd like to investigate those sources and pull them into so we're getting the full picture. That is probably going to be long-term. Short-term, what we're trying to do is finish up the new website and then deploy that, get that out to the general public. We've got geocoding cleanup to do. So those projects that stretch across the city aren't there mucking up people's view. And then we're going to have a big push reaching out to advocacy groups, ward offices, news outlets, trying to get as many eyes on this as possible. We want the public interested, informed, engaged, so that everybody can take part in our city's infrastructure. So over here on the right is our website URL, wardwisechicago.org. There's a QR code too. We meet every week at Chai Hack Night, Tuesday nights. We're going to be meeting after this presentation. But that's all I've got here. I would just like to thank everybody here for being part of the civic tech community or part of the broader ecosystem of people working to make Chicago a better place to live.
Thank you, Sean. This was great. And we do have a decent amount of questions, so I will hop into those. First question is about that categorization. The person was asking, is it possible for projects to have more than one category, the menu spending, or do you only assign one category per project?
Right now, we're only assigning one category per project. I guess that's something we could do in the future, but so far it's kind of dry cut which way a project falls.
That makes sense, especially if a lot of them are from the literal menu. Another question, kind of in a different direction, is asking about how the group has been collaborating, and they're asking, do you do most of your work in the in-person weekly meetings or remote collaboration, maybe in between meetings? And can you talk about how the Wardwise group has operated?
Yeah, so that's been a learning thing as we've gone over this past year. Most of the work happens remotely. So our weekly meetings tend to be check-ins where we're figuring out issues that people are having and brainstorming ideas to fix them, and then planning out what our future work's going to be. But we have a GitHub repo, and on that GitHub repo, we have issues outlined, and people assign themselves to issues. We're not always the best at adhering to that. Sometimes it's more ad hoc, but that's the general process.
Cool. Another question is about why this data wasn't easier to obtain. They're wondering if you have any insights about whether it will be in the city data portal at any point, or if you know anything about why this data, like the data that's in the PDFs, why it's not in a more accessible format and maybe in the data portal.
Yeah, I don't have much background on that. I'm going to guess it's not going in the data portal anytime soon. I think public offices tend to work in these formats, PDFs, and they share them and they call it a done day, and the data doesn't persist beyond that. I have emailed the Open Data Portal once or twice. I didn't get much back. I emailed about another data set and they were responded very quickly. So I think different groups are involved behind the data portal. And if you hit the right group, you get a response. But I haven't heard anything about this kind of data being published there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, some other questions about the data itself. So, have you all done any analysis on the menu item pricing changes from year to year? So, like the cost of like an alley resurfacing from 2020 to 2021, and whether those costs are changing.
Nope, not yet. It's definitely changing. I know that stuff's gone up. If you're interested, we're going to be meeting after this and you can come help us do that kind of analysis.
Yeah. And a similar question, have you done any analysis to see if the actual cost of each project matches the quoted price, like once the project is actually completed?
Yeah, no, we haven't done that yet either. That would be harder to do because we don't have those menus that we sent or that are sent to the ward offices. I've only got the 2023 one, and there was one published in Inspector General's report for I think 2017. So I could do that for 2 or 3 years, but that's about it. We're more limited there.
Um, yeah, that's like an additional data source. Another question about the 2023 data, is it are the maps for the 2023 data using the new wards or the pre-redistricting wards?
The new wards. The 2023 data is interesting because it's not fully published yet. I think because of that transition period going on. So there was data published. It's all for the new ward boundaries, but there was like a partial data published in October. And then I managed to get more data like a month ago, but it's the full budget hasn't been used for some wards. So I think they're still working that out.
And that kind of goes into the next question. Is there a detailed cost breakdown of each project that is visible to the public? Um,
No. As far as I know, it's just that total that's published in the PDF. If you're lucky and you're very specific, you maybe could do a FOIA, that's Freedom of Information Act request to the city and try to get a more specific breakdown. I don't know if they have that on hand or if they'd share it.
yeah, that makes sense. Um, some other questions. I'm curious if you all have any sense of for the participatory budgeting wards. I live in a participatory budgeting ward, and I'm curious if there's any data about participation levels, like the voter turnout on that, or like if you can see an impact of PB in terms of do the wards that do participatory budgeting like spend their money noticeably differently than wards that don't.
Um, hmm. So their participatory budgeting is overseen by PB Chicago, which is the Great Cities Institute at UIC. So they facilitate a lot of the participatory budgeting and they might have that data. I don't have it personally, and I don't think it's been published anywhere. Um, I think somebody was doing a project though, trying to see if PB, I want to say it was Jake Smith's research paper or like proof of concept paper, where he was looking at how PB wards spend money compared to non-PB wards. Anecdotally, in my ward, the 35th, the turnout's like so. I think we had 800 people vote last year out of like 55,000 residents. I don't know if that holds the same across the city, which is still better than nobody. I think you get people that are very interested in this stuff voting, which is not a bad thing. I guess it's better to have somebody that's informed and interested than somebody who's not.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that. So I'll go look up my my wards turnout after this. Um, and another question, it seems like to interpret the spending like might require some awareness of local context. So for example, if there's wards where like the road conditions are actually worse than other areas, like maybe spending on street resurfacing is appropriate. I guess, do you have any like tips or caveats for people working on with the data to figure out like ways to kind of maybe try to get a sense for that local context to assess some of that stuff?
Yeah. Okay, these are all like rules of thumb because I don't have any concrete answers. I think South Side wards, they're more geographically dispersed because the population's not as dense. So I think it makes sense that they would spend more on street resurfacing just because they have more streets to cover. Um, you also have to kind of pay attention to other stuff that's going on in the wards. So like CDOT publishes each year upcoming bike lanes that they're funding, and some of that's through menu money, but some of it's through like CDOT has their own bucket of funds. So if a ward is already getting a lot of bike lane projects, they're not going to spend their own money on that. If it's coming from better sources, they can prioritize other things. That's about it. One of the groups that presented a few weeks back, Project Sidewalk, is a tool that's mapping out the quality condition of sidewalks across the city, and they're doing it on a ward by ward basis. So if you're, that's the only data set I know that's kind of that more big picture view of infrastructure maintenance. So if you're in a ward that's not using Project Sidewalk and you want to look at like sidewalk data specifically, you could reach out to me or reach out to them. I could get you connected and reach out to the ward office and they could start mapping out sidewalks all around the ward.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess that's another question is like, do you have any sense about how the different aldermanic offices like approach this? Because working with something like Project Sidewalk, that takes a kind of significant amount of time and money, to like do that kind of like prep work for a specific type of infrastructure. Um, I guess I'm curious if you have any sense of how the aldermen tend to like approach this process if they don't use participatory budgeting. Um, if you know anything about like what that's like behind the scenes in terms of how they pick things or prioritize things.
Yeah, I've got a data point of one working with my ward office, which is participatory budgeting. But I know each year CDOT, in addition to that menu that they send out, they have like breakdowns of what they think road conditions are. So like streets that maybe need to be prioritized for resurfacing. They get with that to 311 data for like potholes and sidewalk issues that they can look at. But I've also heard like specifically street resurfacing that's not always the most accurate, and sometimes hearing directly from residents is a better representation of the actual condition of the streets.
That makes sense. Um, a couple other questions about data access. So, one is, can you share where the PDFs that have the final amounts, where are those? They're asking about a link, which we can maybe repost into the chat.
Yes, let me, so it's the office of, maybe I can search OBM, aldermanic menu, there we go. So I will share this link in, can I do the chat? Oh, Zoom is annoying because it goes over the top of your bar. So if that comes through, it's
Yeah,
the Office of Budget and Management. So the 2023 data is here, hyperlinked there. And if you want to see the older ones, you click here, and that's where they've got the rest of them. And they're all PDFs. Oh, and then John Ruff's stuff. I'm not going to be able to find it quickly, but that slide I had that had all the data sources, his is in the repo. It's PDFs. And if you search around, you can find them because they're not published. So that would
cool.
be 2005 through 2011.
Thank you. Another question was about like, can people request this data from their own alderman's office?
Probably. I don't know if they would know how to get it. And they're probably, if they do, they would eventually direct you towards this. One of the things we hope to do once we get this new site published and user friendly is to send it to every single ward office. So then if somebody asks, they can just send them to this tool and they have it.
That's a cool idea. And related question to some of the other ones about what data is available where. I think you mentioned that are the menu spending options like posted publicly, like the thing that the aldermen get with the prices and the projects, is that made public? And are you aware of advocacy efforts around changing what's on that list? Because it seems like there's like a pretty strong bias that things that are kind of made available through that would, get selected. And so do we know what the mechanism is to change like what those options are?
First part of the question, to the best of my knowledge, it's not publicly available. I only got it through, I was helping out in participatory budgeting for my ward as a volunteer. So that's where I got the PDF from. But now it is because it's on the WardWise Chicago website. I don't know of any advocacy efforts, but I agree that yes, there's definitely a bias towards something that's on that list is much easier to do than something that's not. I think the big thing that's missing is probably transit focused projects. And that gets messy because the more arterial streets where most of like public transportation is focused involves CDOT allowing you to do something, and sometimes IDOT has jurisdiction. So that's more difficult. But yes, I agree that don't currently know of advocacy efforts, but those would be great.
Um, yeah. And I think that also goes to, it's been interesting to see some of the alders getting more involved in. I just saw Matt Martin is posted about changing the route, the number 9 bus. And so curious what went into that. I don't know if that was with menu money in any way though. Okay, sorry. That's my own bus interest coming out. Another question is, do you know if other cities have systems like the menu spending? Like it does seem like it could potentially be a little bit rife with corruption given Chicago's, history. And is it a typical thing that municipalities would have?
That is a good question. I know participatory budgeting has precedent in other cities. I don't know if it's used for infrastructure, just the budget in general. I want to say it came out of Brazil originally, but no, beyond that, I don't know. And yeah, I agree. There's a lot of potential for corruption, giving one person, one office the ability to make these decisions. The flip side of that is because it kind of cuts through all the bureaucracy, it also gives residents a lot of control to influence the infrastructure that's happening around them.
Yeah. Okay, that's a more positive perspective. Um, Another question, do you have any advice for people who might be thinking about starting a breakout group, in terms of, what you've learned from starting WardWise, or any plugs for things you'd want people to, maybe things that are near WardWise that people could pick up and run.
Okay, so thanks for starting breakout groups. I think the in-person Shy Hack nights tend to be the best time to start a breakout group just because there's a lot of faces and it's like in person. You don't necessarily have to have this up front, but having a good way to onboard people is important. It's like we always have the struggle in our breakout calls of trying to talk through the things that we need to discuss, but then like a new person shows up and we have to onboard the new person, that delays it. So we still onboard the new person, but we have like our breakout page is very much geared towards being instructional. So you can like click through it and figure things out on your own. And then we haven't been the best with this, but keeping up on our issues list. So if like somebody's new and they want to get their hands on something, there's a list they can choose from. They can also see like, oh, these are my skills. This item matches my skills. I can go after that. Let's see, WardWise adjacent breakout groups. There's a lot of little urbanism tools that could be useful. I don't think the city does any kind of tracking with businesses of like who's visiting businesses, and that sometimes holds up projects. It's like businesses are very against bike lanes going in because I think it's going to take away from parking. And the advocates will say, well, most people are walking to the business anyways, but there's not data to support that. So that could be a cool breakout group. I've had other ideas. If the person that asked that's around, come hang out with us and I'll look up. I've got an idea list somewhere. I can share some.
Yeah. I think there's always more data questions also. And I guess a related question is any tips for sustaining a breakout group longer term? I mean, you all have been meeting for at least a year now, right?
A little over here. Yeah. That is a great question. We've had turnover. I think any breakout group, like you get a bunch of people that pop their heads in and a couple people stick and they stick for a couple months and then new people come on, those people fade out. I mean, we're volunteering, our time is limited. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's the stuff I said before, making it easy for people to get engaged and then being able to like pursue their own work. You want people, I guess you don't want to like constrain people. If somebody's really interested and they want to get going, you let them do whatever they want to do, and then you try to guide them along if they have issues.
Yeah, that aligns with my experience with ghost buses. So +1. Um, Kind of a different angle of question is there any transparency in how, like, in how often or whether CDOT like disapproves like original selections from alders? I guess maybe specifically for participatory budgeting, if people vote for a project and then CDOT says it won't be feasible.
Not that I know of. Again, if you really want to like do a deep dive investigation, I'm sure you could FOIA request office emails about that stuff and see it. But that's going to be a lot of effort. I don't know how much you'll dig up.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's a trend that there's just not a ton of transparency around this, like in general, which is, always could be better. Another question is there anything that's like the most like surprising to you? Like, are there kind of assumptions that you had about this stuff that you've realized were wrong as you've like, gone through the data?
Um, that's a good question. I came in with a lot of like prejudices, so I think some of them have been confirmed. Like I thought a lot of money was going towards street resurfacing, and that's the case, and not a lot going towards biking. That's the case. Um, no, not really. I mean, like there's interesting projects that pop up that you wouldn't think about, like parks and things and murals. Those come up and those are cool. But yeah, not too many surprises from what I was expecting.
Yeah, that was what kind of jumped out to me is I feel like in my ward, there's almost always public art is part of the options for the participatory budgeting. And I don't know if that's an our neighborhood thing or if that's more typical. Um,
Oh, I will say, okay, so not with the data we're working with, but just like my involvement with the process. It's interesting. Sometimes the community will vote for, my ward does it by category. You're not voting for specific projects, like you're voting categories of projects. And sometimes the community votes a lot for certain categories, and there haven't been enough suggestions to fill the budget. And so that's interesting. And I don't think there's a way in the data to track that, but also a good reason to be, if anybody listening, to suggest your own ideas so that the community votes for something like bike lanes, they can actually use the full amount of the budget towards that.
yeah, that's really interesting because our ward it does like hyper specific, like this kind of sculpture installed at this corner of this park or something. So that's interesting.
I think there's been
Um,
issues where if like, because the voting turnout's not always great, if there's a specific project you want done and everybody on your block wants it done, you just get everybody on your block to vote and it wins. So the category allows it to be like the ward office is still, well, the ward office usually working with volunteers still vets the projects and make sure it's evenly distributed. That's
yeah,
our solution to that.
that makes sense. Um, okay, so I think we're basically at time. So I think we'll end it there. But thank you so much, Sean. This was great. Thank you to everyone in the Wardwise group for all of your awesome work. Um, Round of applause from me representing the audience. And I think Josh, if you want to pull up the slide with the post presentation Zoom, folks are invited to come to that. And that is where you can also, from that Zoom call is where you can then join the Wardwise breakout group meeting if you would like to get involved. Um, so actually, Sean, since you are familiar, I will ask you to do the tradition with me. So on the count of three, we will say go forth and hack. So 1, 2, 3,
Go
go
forth and
forth and
hack.
hack. Thank you again, Sean. Thanks, everybody.